It has long been speculated what the stories are behind some of the old mysteries of this game that have remained a secret for almost 20 years. For many players, those mysteries have been forgotten and it is believed that they are just unsolved quests and meaningless stories. For others, they might have an explanation or even a solution as a quest, but they are extremely complex and have yet to be discovered. Will these ancient mysteries have a solution, or at least some logical explanation and connection within the lore? At some point, most parts of the puzzle start to come together and seem to make sense. Some of these stories are incredibly difficult to weave together. Some necessary clues are so hidden that you depend on extremely scarce information. Some is not even in books and you depend on conversations with a couple of NPCs and the understanding of some abstract concepts, and only then you are able to understand the whole picture, or at least an important part of it. This video will explain the connection between the game's most famous mysteries that have kept players intrigued for a long time. In Tibia exist several races of creatures and each has its own history and characteristics. In this case, it is necessary to understand the base history of the dwarfs and elves. They belong to the so-called ancient races of the game. That is, they were one of the first races created by the gods along with many others, such as cyclops or lizards, for example. What differentiates these races from the others is that they are survivors, that is, in Tibian time, they are millennial races and their stories are incredibly long and many of their stories are closely linked to the greatest mysteries of the game. In the case of the dwarfs, Durin was the first dwarf in Tibia created by the gods. He is considered a celestial paladin by the dwarfs, just like the 7 elven gods who are also considered celestial paladins. There are also 16 more dwarfs that are considered the firstborn dwarfs. These dwarfs are buried in the temple of Khazad-dûm called Halls of the Ancients. They are called Children of Earth and Fire. Therefore, these 16 dwarfs are the ancestors of most of the dwarf that we know today, as there are the dwarf geomancers and the dwarf pyromancer, which are followers and practice the art of earth and fire. However, there are also other types of dwarfs in Khazad-dûm, called dwarf technomancer, who are passionate about machines, numbers and formulas, and the other dwarfs consider as a mockery of the elements of earth and fire, since they do not understand why they like mathematics and machines and why don't they follow the teachings of earth and fire. But then, where did these dwarfs technomancers come from? As I said at the beginning, Durins are also a firstborn dwarf. But unlike his brothers, he was not buried in Khazad-dûm, but rather a remote place. This remote place is the entrance to the Paradox Tower. There you will find 2 graves that give us the clue to understand the puzzle. Anyway, if you are an old player it should be much easier to relate it, since in the old times, in this place we could find Durin's tomb in a much more explicit way and then it was changed. On the other hand, in Ankreman the NPCs will tell you about the dwarfs, who did not learn their lesson. But what kind of lesson are they referring to? They will tell you that they were close to ascension, but they are deeply rooted to their arc. As mentioned in the previous videos, the concept of the arc can be found in the city of Ankreman and it refers to the physical part of a being, while the Ra and Uthan represent the soul and the mind respectively. Therefore, the Ankreman NPCs tell us that the dwarfs did not reach ascension because their bond to their body is too strong. But what does this really refer to? Well, considering that Durin is considered a celestial paladin, we can head to the Darashia temple to ask NPC Kazmir about this type of celestial entity. Kazmir explains that all mortal creatures can ascend to heaven, becoming celestial beings, but if you have not enhanced your soul you are not prepared to ascend, therefore your body is tied to our plane of existence through reincarnation. It means that the celestial beings that were not prepared to ascend reincarnate in someone else's body at the moment of death, that is, their existence takes over a foreign body. Now if we remember Durin as a celestial being, we can deduce several things. As the NPCs of Ankreman tell us, the dwarfs did not manage to free themselves from their bodies to ascend, therefore they reincarnated in someone else. Also, coincidentally, Durin's tomb is located at the entrance to Paradox Tower, located in the Khazad-dûm Mountains. As many will know, this tower belongs to the mysterious NPC called Mad Mage or Prisoner, which is located in Mintwalin. At the entrance of this tower we will find two tombs with some curious descriptions. In short, it is the same Mad Mage who speaks to himself in the inscriptions of the tombs. This is explained by various reasons which are not easy to understand. But in short, Durin, the god of the dwarfs, reincarnated in the body of Mad Mage, and at the same time, Mad Mage is Durin. On the other hand, Mad Mage is the reincarnation of the god named Kirok. The description of this god can be found in the Tibia Genesis, which was born during the unsuccessful attempt to separate the double god Uman-Zathrath. This tiny shard grew and expanded until it took shape and eventually became a sentient creature of its own. Kirok the Mad or Mad Mage was born. Owing to his peculiar ancestry, this strange god has a twisted and a schizophrenic nature. Also, this god is really famous for his twisted sense of humor and bad jokes, as you can see when you talk to him in Mintwalin. Perhaps now these tombstones in which the Mad Mage speaks to himself make sense to you, due to his schizophrenia. At this point the history of Tibia becomes quite strange. Durin reincarnated into a mad god, but he also died, but at the same time he is alive. Anyway, for this reason we managed to understand the name of this quest called Paradox Tower, since the story ends up being a paradox. For the same reason, the reward of this tower is a phoenix egg, which represents rebirth or reincarnation. The talons are suspected to be the sparks that fell from the sky during the attempted separation between the gods. Be that as it may, now a lot of information begins to make sense. If we go to the Island of the Kings, we will find a very famous book called You Cannot Even Imagine, where the author says that he is extremely old, he does not know very well if he is alive or dead, that he is the last of his race, and tells of several facts that he saw in his life, and that he was the one who assisted the great calculator to create the famous 469 language. Also, he is annoyed, since despite all these great achievements, people go to his mountain to ask for advice on how to seduce a shepherdess. In short, this book was written by Durin himself. Its longevity is explained by the fact that dwarfs are known to live much longer than other creatures, and this would explain the various events he saw during this time. He does not know if he is alive or dead due to what was explained above regarding his reincarnation. Durin also thought that he was the last of his race because he did not know that he had left offspring. But as we now know, there are the mysterious dwarf technomancers. He was the one who assisted the Bone Lords to create the 469 language, as he is a dwarf technomancer, and the dwarfs technomancers are known for their passion about formulas, mathematics and machinery. And finally, he means that people are going to ask to his mountain for useless advice because his tomb is at the entrance of Paradox Tower, on the mountain of Khazad-dûm. In conclusion, Durin or Mad Mage is the creator of the mysterious 469 language. For this same reason Edrin's Mad Mage knows how to build Golem, and that is why you also find a dwarf tree next to the tower. But the surprises do not end here. We know that in Serpentine Tower, when adding the numbers from the research papers, not including the forbidden spell, gives us result 469. The explanation of this is more complex to explain, but basically the dwarfs were participants in the experiments in this mysterious tower. The dwarfs, at some point in history, betrayed the good gods, allying with Zathrath and helping him create the first demon of Tibia, which, contrary to common belief, was not the creature we know as demon. The first demon in Tibia was called Jinn. As you can see, many things are beginning to make sense. The behemoth is of the earth element, just like the dwarf geomancer, not to mention the ability they have to throw rocks like this class of dwarfs. The fire elemental refers to the connection with the dwarf pyromancer. While the vampire represents life and death, that is, the necromancers. When visiting the Khazad-dûm library, we will find many books that give us insight into what really happened. One of the books talks about how dwarfs don't like to travel by boat. And then another book tells us that certain dwarfs discovered a spell that will help them walk in water. Therefore, the boots of water walking would represent this fact. since to walk between Khazad-dûm and Ankreman, they would rather wear these mysterious boots. We also have another book that describes us that some dwarfs were doing experiments to discover the secrets of divination, which belongs to the elves, called Divination Spell, like the research paper that we found in the Serpentine Tower. In addition, they also worked in a counterspell in another base to find their enemies, the Teshiel Elves, which have the ability known as Dreamwalking, which belongs to the ability to inhabit a different dimension. Therefore, they needed an improved Find Person spell, which is another research paper on the Serpentine Tower. And finally, in the mysterious Tower of Ankreman, there is a document called Stone Skin Spell, which describes experiments of a certain spell that paralyzed people or even petrified them. Therefore, the famous basilisk must have been some type of failed experimentation that ended up being this snake, which for obvious reasons, is found in Khazad-dûm. Finally, this betrayal of the dwarfs against the gods took consequences. The angry gods decided to abandon their creations forever, punishing the races so that they could never communicate with each other again, creating different types of language, such as 469, binary, deepling language, among others. While the only original language is the language of the gods, called Ancient Language, which is found in a book is Serpentine Tower. In short, the Serpentine Tower would be something similar to the Tower of Babel if we look at it from this point of view. As you can see, many of these mysteries are not random, rather they have an extremely complex history to find, but with patience and help from the community, everything will eventually be solved. But would this be all the secrets of the game? The truth is, there are thousands of secrets waiting to be discovered. There is a lot of new content that is not yet explored. Now I invite you to investigate the other half of the story, the elves. As I said at the beginning, there are also 7 elven gods called Celestial Paladins. Will they also play an important role? Perhaps much more than we think.